In this introductory video, we're going to talk a little bit about what databases are, and then in subsequent videos, we're going to look at installing software so that you can make your own databases, and then from then on, we're going to talk about how you interact with this database software and make things work. So first, what is a database? So a database is, first of all, a way to store data. So I guess that makes sense from the name. But it's more than just storing data, it's about looking at relationships with data. Databases are used all over the place. On our campus at Alfred University, we use a program called WebWork where students do their homework online for math classes and then submit their answers, and the professors can get their grades off from WebWork. The students can actually look at their grades. All that grade information is actually stored in a database. So a student will log in, work on a homework assignment, and work on a particular problem, and for that problem, the database stores information about how many times they tried to do the problem, when they logged in, that kind of information. And then the professor can go in from there and pull out final grade information. So it's not just the storing of data, but it's the relationships among data. Databases these days are huge in two senses of the word. They're very popular. They're used, again, in all kinds of systems, but they're also huge in the terms of size. I just read an article the other day that Facebook, people uploading pictures to Facebook, all those images are stored in a database, and that database is growing. I think the article said at a rate of 7 um, petabytes a month. That's a huge amount of data. Um, Google stores web page information in a humongous database. So it has programs that go out and look around the internet for web pages, and then when it finds them, it stores all that information in a database. And that database is tremendously huge. It's so huge, in fact, that you can't just go out and say, do a search for your name. If you did it in a traditional sort of way of, I'm going to look through every single web page that existed for my name, it would take forever. The database is just too large. So there's special techniques for doing that kind of thing. We're not going to get into that in this course, but that is a hot topic, obviously a very big topic. Anytime that you are on a web page and you provide some kind of login information, that login information is going to be stored in a database on a server somewhere, maybe along with your password and other information about you. Okay, so I'm going to show you a sample database. Now, the tool that I'm using here is something called MySQL Workbench. SQL is sequential query language. So one of the things that we do with databases is make queries. And we're gonna be seeing a little bit of those pretty soon. So there's three things that we need in terms of interacting with a database. We need the actual database software. That's the stuff that maintains the information and the connections. That's the MySQL. We need a front end that allows us to interact with the database. In this case, I'm using a Windows version called MySQL Workbench, written by the same group that maintains MySQL. And then we need a connection from our front end to the database. So you can see here on the screen, I have a connection. I'm running MySQL locally. So there is a MySQL running on my machine. And again, in the next video, you're going to see how to set that up. And so I have that connection, and I have some models down here. So a model is a model for a database, and I'm going to open this one up. So what I've made is a model for a registration scheme to register students in classes. And this model then isn't an actual database. It doesn't have any stored data in it. It doesn't have any relations in it. But I can take that model and use the connection that I've made to connect to a database. And then using that connection, we can, let's see, connect to database. Okay. So what we have here is this is a bunch of databases that are stored on my machine, but now stored. This is actually in MySQL, and these have data in them. The one we're looking for is registration. We're going to come back to that. Now let's go back to the model. So the model has what's known as what are called tables. I want to take a look at some of these tables, and we can do this one of two ways. I can make more tables in this format here. If I double click on this table, it brings up some variables. There's an ID, a subject, a number, credits, and description. So these are class descriptions. So you might have something like Math 151 for calculus. It's 4 credits, and then have a description for Calculus 1. And then this ID means that when you have a database, every single entry into that database should have a unique identifier one way or another. Now, a simple way to do that is just to assign a unique number to each member or each new entry in the database. And then you can think about the entries in one of these tables as looking like a spreadsheet. Now, there's another way to view this that I think is perhaps a little nicer. So we're going to go over to this EER diagram, the Enhanced Entity Relationship Diagram. So this is a way to describe a database. So I have here a description of the database that we are using, and these are a bunch of different tables. So we have a student record, we have student address information, and I'll talk a bit about why there's two different tables for that. It seems like those might be in one table. Class description, so we've looked at that a little bit. Then we have classes for this one semester for the fall of 15, and then we have registration. And so these are the data, but then in between we see that there's relationships among these data. Okay, so class descriptions, if you think about this, we have a class description for Calculus 1, and that class description doesn't change as the semesters go along. Well, I mean, it could, but calculus doesn't change a whole lot. So when we go over to then put in a fall schedule, we shouldn't have to come up with a description for calculus every time we make up a new schedule for the fall or for the spring. We should have that class description separately, have that stored, and then just be able to link to it. And that's exactly what this does. So we have a class description in terms of the subject and the number and the credits and a description of the course. And then over here, when we build a fall schedule, we put an ID in here. That's the same sort of ID that we had over here. And we link this ID to that one. And then in the fall 15 classes, not only do we need a class description, but we need to know what day of the week it is, we need to know what time of day it is, and we need to know who the instructor is, and maybe some other information, so that will go in there. In terms of students, we need to know some information about students. So we have last name, first name, middle name, a title if they have one, social security number, the date they come into the school, so that's the date matriculated. I mean, there might be more information that we wanted to store, but these are the things that I thought of. And then I also added some student address information. So the street, the city, the state, the zip, the phone they have. These are basically the links back to here. We're not going to worry about those for now. There's a special relationship here, and you might wonder, well, why do I have a separate table for student and for address information from student record? Why don't I just store this information in here? Well, it comes back to the idea that each entry in a table should be one line. And for a student in particular, a student may have more than one address. So you may have a home address, but you also might have a campus address. So we can make a student record that stores stuff that's unique to that student, but then make a separate address record or a table, and then store multiple addresses for each student by storing the ID for the student along with their address information. And it's actually indicated in this diagram as a one-to-many relationship. So this means that there's one thing over here, but there may be many corresponding things over here. So one student may have many addresses. Okay, we're going to put students together with classes and then make up a registration. So in registration, this is a unique identifier for each registered individual. So in the registration, we're going to have an individual and a class. So there's a link up to here. A student may have many different classes they're registered for. So again, this is a one-to-many relationship. And a class may appear in several different sections. So this is a one-to-many relationship. And then all this is really just a list of students with classes, but they're listed by an ID. And so this is a setup for a very basic student registration system. Okay, so now let's go over and look at our database. And inside our database, we're going to take a look at the registration database. So in the query window, when we're on the database tab, so this is an actual physical database, or well, as physical as computer programs get, I suppose. We can start looking at the data that we have. So for example, we have fall 15 classes. I can right click on that and select rows. And when I do that, I can see that the classes that I put in there. So these are the unique IDs. So each row in here has its own unique number. These numbers relate back to classes from the class list. So we could go back and look at the ID numbers for these classes and figure out what class they are. This is the time of day that they're going to meet at. This is the days of the week they're meeting at, and these are the instructors. So this university has some pretty prestigious instructors, although they're all dead. So maybe we could go back and look at class descriptions. So I'm clicking over here on the tables page, or tab, and actually what I want to do is look at the data in here. So if I right click, sorry, I got distracted for a minute. If I right click on class descriptions and select rows 1 through 1,000, we can look at the classes and see that, for example, ID class number 1 is Calc 1, and we have a Calc 2, Calc 3, differential equations, we have some computer science courses, and so let's go back again and look at, we were looking at fall 15 classes, and I want to select rows up to 1,000, and so this ID number right here, this is class number 1, that was Calculus 1. This is Calculus 1, this is Calc 2, Calc 1, this is some of the computer programming courses, if that makes sense. So we're going to see more of this stuff as we go along. Don't get too tied up into this, but these are the relationships that we defined over here in the model. So right now, we're looking at the fall 15 classes table, which I've actually opened twice. Probably didn't need to do that. And the class descriptions. So if we come back here and look at the EER diagram. This is the class descriptions and the fall 15 classes relationship, and they're related to each other through the integer number. Okay, now the last thing we want to do is be able to interact with our data. And again, there's going to be two ways we can do that. We can do this through this interface through Windows, and then there's another way we can do it, and that is to use a command line interface. So the command line interface, it turns out, is going to be very useful for us because it's the command line interface that ultimately interacts with web pages. And in fact, you can see a command line, some command line code right here. When I opened up class descriptions, so when I right-clicked on class descriptions and opened this up, what actually happened was MySQL Workbench ran a query. So a query means let's go out and ask the database some information. And in this case, it said select everything from the registration. So this is the registration database and the class descriptions table. So it said give me everything from the registration class descriptions table, and we got this. And I actually wrote my own query to see all records and database, which does something very similar. In this case, I specify the database first using a use command. So this means use the registration database. And again, you can have other kinds of databases. And then again, select all the entries from the fall 15 classes. So we can execute this. And this is code that you can write. It's like another programming language, the SQL programming language. And if we execute that, again, it gives us those classes. We could put a different table in here if we wanted to. And instead of using fall 15 classes, we could do student records. This. And execute that. And we can look at the students in here. Okay, this is not meant to be a programming video. This is meant to be a what does a database do sort of video. So this gives us a list of students from that are in the database. So we got Jim Bob, Jane Bob, Jim Baker, and Nick Boudreau. One thing you might ask is, we have all this related information, but it's stored in separate tables. If I look at fall 15 registration and ask for all the stuff from there, so when I start to type, it brings up tables that are in this database. These are the students that are registered in the classes they're in. That is incredibly not useful. Here's their student number. Here is, let's see, I think this is the class that they're registered for. This is an ID. This is the unique ID for each entry in the registration table. And each entry has a class and a student. How do you parse that out? Well, it turns out this is where the queries come in. There is a way to say, oh, wait a minute, this is class number 3 from the fall 15 registration table. What is that class? Pull the information out about that class. This is student A001. How do I pull information out about that? And you can do all this using a query. So I want to open up a query here just to show you that it can be done. And if I run this query, and don't panic. I mean, there's a bunch of code up here. We're going to get you to a point where you can write this code. This shows all the students that are registered for the fall 15 semester and the courses that they are registered in. So using queries, we can go back and piece together those tables in ways that it is useful to us. All right, so again, this is just an introduction to what a database is. In the next video, you're going to see instructions for installing MySQL and MySQL Workbench on your laptop. And then in future videos, I'm going to go about showing you how to use MySQL Workbench to make a database of your own. Maybe not anything quite as complicated as this, something a little simpler. And then we'll start getting into running some queries. And we're going to run queries through MySQL Workbench, and we're going to run it through the command line. All right, have fun.